Hey, welcome to this final session at the UWE Annual Geography Conference. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mark Jones. I taught in secondary schools 17, 18 years before becoming the PGC Geography Tutor at UWE. That was up until 2019. I've co-edited the Debates in Geography Education edition 1 and 2 with David Lambert, and also I edited the Handbook of Secondary Geography for the GA. In this final session, I want to look at why geography really matters, but also what geography really matters. Geography Really Matters was selected by Jill Miller, the Geographical Association President for 2019-20, as her theme for the GA's annual conference in April this year. If you follow the conference live, or have viewed different sessions via YouTube, you'll know that the message of the importance and power of geography as a discipline was reinforced in Jill's lecture. But here I want to raise some questions about not only why geography really matters, but also what geography really matters, particularly in an educational landscape that is complex, dynamic and contested. The landscape is complex. Being a geography teacher, either as a specialist or a non-specialist, requires what Claire Brooks calls a teacher's professional compass. Like a traditional compass, it can help us to make choices and decisions about navigating the competing and complex demands of a changing educational landscape. That landscape is also dynamic. Things change, and sometimes very quickly. And thirdly, that landscape is contested. Interpreting the landscape is not straightforward. It can mean different things to different people. And as such, different priorities and routes through the educational landscape may be selected. This last point is why scholarly engagement with the discipline is so important. And this means thinking hard about what geography is taught and why it has been selected. In putting this presentation together, I took inspiration from a favourite text. If unfamiliar to you, it's by two Dutch cartographers who lay out 21 countries in an imagined world of experience. Here's one example from the Atlas of Experience. This landscape is called pleasure, and you can see the playful nature of the text. Other experiences include knowledge, change, passion, and mountains of work. So, taking these ideas and using the Atlas of Experience, I created an educational landscape. Here it is. The educational landscape I've started is not complete, but it gives an idea of one way in which the educational landscape might be represented at the moment. Remember, it's only one view, and it's meant here to act as a stimulus for thinking, discussing and debating about geography's place in that educational landscape. As you look, are you drawn to particular parts of the landscape? Some of these parts may be familiar, inviting. Other parts of the landscape may be less so. Some areas may be unfamiliar to you, but you want to explore more about them. As an activity, what would your educational landscape look like if you were asked to draw one for yourself at this point in your teaching career? For some of you, this may be very early in your career, about to start your PGCE, or just about to complete your PGCE. In the rest of this presentation, I'm going to zoom in on particular parts of this landscape to make some points in this final session. So first, let's zoom in on geography. Geography, or geographies, for the discipline is expansive, some might say unruly. There are many ways to look at and explore geography. If we return to Jill Miller's presidential address at this year's GA conference, this slide captures the enormity of the subject, and there's a lot of geography that we could select from for school geography. So, selection is key. Take a moment here to read this quotation by David Lambert in a recent article. What is being taught and for what purpose? Well, David here refers to powerful disciplinary knowledge. You may be familiar with this term, or you may be more familiar with the concept of pedagogical content knowledge developed by Schulman. But PDK has entered the language of geography teachers, and if it isn't yet a familiar term to you, then this is an area that I would urge you to explore. If you want to read more about powerful disciplinary knowledge, then your first port of call should be the GeoCapabilities website itself. Here you can see a screen grab which focuses on the principles of the GeoCapabilities, in which Professor David Lambert explains those principles behind the capabilities approach. More recently, the book by Richard Bustin, involved in the project, has come out, and for those of you who are familiar with the work of Mark Enser, Making Every Geography Lesson Count, in the autumn, his book on powerful geography will also be available. Using a capabilities approach, geography becomes a subject that can contribute to young people's deep descriptive world knowledge, for them to become theoretically informed about the relational understanding of people and places in the world, but also, and importantly, the propensity and disposition to think about alternative social, economic and environmental futures. Now, previously, the GeoCapabilities 2 project had sought to apply a capabilities approach to a subject discipline, and in doing so, to reposition the contribution of geography to the education of young people. GeoCapabilities is now in phase 3, and a key objective is to extend the work completed in phase 2 by focusing on public, state-funded schools serving young people living in less privileged social and economic circumstances, often the most challenging learning environments. In this slide, here is a contribution from Australian geography academic Alric Maud, and here he contributes to the debate in 2018, where he distinguishes 5 types of powerful knowledge in geography. The slide here has a great deal of text on, and I'm not expecting you to read it now, but I wanted to show you that different geographers in different contexts are debating what is powerful geographical knowledge or powerful disciplinary knowledge. As well as thinking about the selection of geography, we also need to think about the sequencing, how the different geographies that we're sharing with young people fit together and how they come to make sense of them. What do we start with? What do we end with? How often do we revisit different aspects of geography? One way of thinking about this is in terms of how we sequence our units of work. And what dictates that? Whether it's the term or half term that dictates that, or whether you have a broader, bigger picture view that sits outside the convenience of every 6 weeks or every 7 weeks. Some very useful professional learning can be had by watching Kate Stockings talking about how to design a great Key Stage 3 curriculum, although for her curriculum coherence is bigger than Key Stage 3, looking at a 7-year plan. I'd recommend watching her video of her talk online. The third aspect to consider that I want to raise at this point, although very briefly, is recontextualization, or put another way, how the geography material is translated from source into the dynamics of the classroom. Recontextualization comes from the work of Basil Bernstein. A good source to find out more about recontextualization, in view of some of the things that we've already talked about in this presentation, is Lambert's editorial on the knotty question of recontextualizing geography. I can also point you in the direction of Steve Puttick's work on recontextualizing knowledge for lessons. This is based on Steve's ethnographic study of 3 geography departments in 3 different schools. And what it shows is a continuum of the degree of recontextualization and also some of the influences that teachers take into consideration when translating material into their lessons. And so to bring these 3 aspects of curriculum making together, let's consider the curriculum making model. I know this will be familiar to many of you. But curriculum making by the teacher requires us to make careful choices concerning the relationship between the subject, pedagogy, and the student's experiences and interests. These three resources must be kept in some kind of balance to avoid overly focusing on one resource at the expense of the other two. An overfocus, for example, on pedagogy could result in genericism, with poor attention to the subject's big ideas, its content, and its skills. An overfocus on the subject could result in a restricted view of pedagogy and over-reliance on one type of teaching. And an overfocus on the student's experiences could result in not progressing pupils' learning or introducing them to Young's idea of powerful knowledge. Engaging successfully with curriculum making requires teachers to have a secure professional knowledge of the curriculum and the subject that they teach, to be skilled in curriculum design, and to take account of context-specific factors at their school and classroom level. The environment in which teachers work must be positive, providing professional learning opportunities and minimising barriers to the curriculum making process. You may have noticed in the educational landscape that alongside geography, education is also a significant place. Alongside the question what geographies really matter and to whom, we need to revisit the fundamental question about what is the purpose of education. This may seem a straightforward question, but our responses can reveal our underlying ideologies and philosophies. Often, education can be presented as binary oppositions, knowledge versus skills, traditional versus progressive education. But helpful here is the work of Hopkins and Northern, 2009, who remind us that there is an easy way to eliminate these facile but dangerous dichotomies. Simply substitute and for not and versus. So, of course, in our teaching, we consider knowledge and skills. There may be times when a teacher-led approach, the land of instruction as it appears on this educational landscape, may be more appropriate than a student-centred approach. Or is it that it's a balance of both? And the same with some traditional methods versus more progressive education. The core versus hinterland discussion is around the idea of what is the core knowledge that students require, the hinterland being the further contexts and examples and analogies that can be explored with that core knowledge. In further exploring this question, it's worth revisiting this article by David Lambert, written in 2013, Geography in School and a Curriculum of Survival. I've used here a quotation towards the end of the article, where David talks about the end is always the geographically educated person, rather than the subject matter being an end in itself. So that brings us to the question, what is the purpose of geography education? In the Debates in Geography Education, first and second edition, the overarching principle underpinning the books is the possibility of a progressive knowledge-led geography curriculum which invests in the emancipatory power of education, in initiating all young people into forms of specialised knowledge and powerful thought. This borrows the core argument proposed by the Geo-Capabilities Project, which is that teachers need to think hard about what they teach. As if we do not accept this professional responsibility, we risk giving up the power and significance of geography in our teaching, and, the project argues, depriving and restricting the personal and intellectual growth of young people to become fully capable adults. This is quite a claim, of course, that if you are not taught how to think geographically, you are not fully educated. At the start of the presentation, I said that the educational landscape is complex and dynamic, and also contested. People have different views about what is important, and that can translate into the structure of lessons. So just a note in terms of the rise of cognitive science that we're seeing in some schools and in some geography teachers' practice. Like anything, you need to be informed and to think about your own particular context in terms of using different aspects of cognitive science. For me, one of the things to be wary of is falling into a formulaic approach to the structure of lessons. For that's something that we've had in the past, and we've definitely seen the disadvantages of that in schools. If you want to know more about cognitive science, I've put a link here to the Chartered College, which has a wide range of different types of readings about different aspects of cognitive science, from retrieval practice to interleaving to dual coding and so on. And also just a note on fads, thinking about some of the practices that often become non-negotiables in schools. Here I've playfully suggested the end of the dirt road when the pool of pens. But the real point here is about questioning some of the practices that we're asked to do and what the evidence is that these actually do have meaningful learning gains for students. Interestingly here, student voice also appears in this part of the map, and that's not to be construed as a fad, but it just shows the importance of seeing the bigger picture and how juxtaposition in a small part of a landscape can imply false meanings. Student voice for many geographers is an important and powerful critical pedagogy to help inform practice in school. Of course, to be informed of the complexities of the educational landscape, we need to think about the professional learning opportunities that we currently engage in. What professional learning have you engaged in recently? Today is an example. Where did this take place? What did it involve? Who was involved? But perhaps more important, what impact will it have on you and the students in your classes? Just wanted to remind you of the GA's 2019, What is the Evidence Underpinning Critical Thinking for Achievement? In this document, we can see here the importance of subject-specific professional learning and also the importance of collaborative inquiry through teacher networks. Increasingly, professional learning opportunities come to us via our mobile phones or laptops. And here are a few examples that have happened in the last few months. I'd strongly recommend the GA Conference Materials 2020. In this particular slide, it's an image from the Teach Meet that's organised annually by David Rogers. Here I'm highlighting the Living Geography blog compiled by Alan Parkinson and updated regularly, sometimes several times a day. It's a really good blog for finding out what is going on in the world of geography, but also geography beyond the classroom, thinking about new ways that geography could be represented in the curriculum. One way that Alan has been thinking about this is what he calls his PC geographies, so post-coronavirus school geographies. And it's essentially a range of ideas for what might feed into future curriculum planning, but well worth a visit. You'll have seen on the educational landscape the Twitter sphere area next to the RGS and the GA, the two subject associations. The PLN is your personalised learning network, how you keep in contact both face-to-face and virtually with other geographers around the country and in fact around the world. And Twitter is an example of that. I'm not going to recommend particular people to follow, that's for you to decide. But the hashtag geography teacher is something that will bring up related tweets about geography and geography in the school curriculum. Both subject associations do a tremendous amount to support geography and the future of geography in schools. That's the RGS and the GA. In this example, I've chosen the GA publication about a progression framework for geography, something that over the last year will have been on the minds of many geographers in schools as they seek to respond to the current Ofsted agenda of the 3 I's. And so to conclude this presentation, I want to return to the editorial on the knotty question of recontextualizing geography by David Lambert. We've seen that geography is a multifaceted discipline. It's constantly evolving, changing. There are different versions of geography that are presented both in time and in space. But David encourages us strongly to embrace as a virtue the dynamic and evolving nature of the discipline. And he gives us some examples. For example, I again recommend that this is an article that you would find useful to read. However, I realise that time, resource and energy can often mean thinking about what happens on a daily basis, either online or in the classroom. As we said at the beginning of the presentation, the educational landscape is complex, it's dynamic, but it's also contested. Thank you.